Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast.
Hello, my name is Hasan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 132. I first encountered the stories that we are featuring on our show today, and the author today, as a middle-aged child. Now, if this sounds like a weird framing, consider that I was always the kind of kid that had a strong literary streak. For example, I first read Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck when I was 8 years old, and I cried like a baby when that big autistic fellow died in the book, which made me weird, by the way. And that's okay to say that I was weird. It's fine. But such literary interests also made me open and opened me up to the power of storytelling, the impact of experience, and the capacity to mash up those two things in interesting and potentially restorative ways. Later in school, I formally studied the stories from this author today in a little bit of depth. And during my learning, I was exposed to the verisimilitude, there you go, I love that word, of understanding the subtext of context, as well as the power of language, the magic of metaphor, and the necessity of veracity being and serving as the soul of wit. In that formal study, I was also exposed to ideas that I am certain led, via the many winding roads of life, to developing some of the threads of ideas I've been weaving together the last few months in my mind. As a result of hosting conversations on this podcast, my extensive book and Substack reading, and yes, even observing the stream of doom flow by via the internet, delivered to me directly by my phone, I have some questions that this author's writing in the world serve to coalesce into something, even these comments today. So today on the show, we will be pulling leadership lessons for leaders from one of the more unlikely short stories by a celebrated writer of the Gilded Age whose writing has never been out of print since he died, which is stunning, actually. Today, we are going to be covering, for our Christmas/winter season, The Gift of the Magi as part of 41 Stories by O. Henry. Leaders. Sometimes the threads of thoughts come together to form a patchwork fabric of conclusions, and then you read a story or a set of stories by an author that confirms whatever conclusion you may have independently woven together. And of course, today we're going to be covering these stories. We're going to be talking about them with my good friend and bon vivant of the winter season, Tom Libby. How you doing, Tom?
I'm hanging in there, man. I'm living my best life.
Now, isn't it snowing in the Northeast at this point? Like, you're in the Northeast. Isn't it snowing today?
It's not snowing today, so we have not to be all meteorological on you. We have this weird high pressure system right now sitting right in right around, like, hovering over the harbor, like where Boston Harbor is, stretching out to just about Connecticut. So any kind of precipitation that's hitting that bottom half of that is literally just going around New England. It's the weirdest thing to watch on the radar screen, but no, it's not rain. It's not snowing right now.
Well, that's good, because where I am at, it is a balmy 65 degrees. So
I think it's 44, 42 or 43 today for me.
We had we had like 2 days of like almost 32-degree temperatures, and everybody locally almost lost their minds. Anyway, so
Fun fact, I had to spend some time out in the forest this past weekend with my brother. And when we showed up to the forest, it was 18 degrees out.
it is amazing to me that like human beings don't care about the weather. Like if you look at like woolly mammoth death sites, you see like little sharp little arrows because like people just killed them and ate them because they don't care. They're just like, I don't know. That seems like something we should eat. It's 19 below. Doesn't matter. We're gonna go get that thing. We're hungry. That thing will keep us warm. We don't care. We don't care how cold it is out. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, with that, now that we've covered our meteorological portion of the show, we're going to pick up today with O. Henry's The Gift of the Magi. Now, this is a short story by the author William Sidney Porter, aka O. Henry. It's only around 5 to 6 pages long. And so what we're going to do is we're going to dip in, dip out of the story, and we're going to talk about a lot of different areas today. We're going to talk about the Gilded Age. We're going to talk about poverty and pride and vanity. We're going to talk about Christmas. And of course, we're going to talk about the life and times of William Sidney Porter. So from The Gift of the Magi, we open $1.87. That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's checks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it, $1.87, and the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl, so Della did it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home. A furnished flat at $8 per week. It did not exactly beg her description, but it certainly had that word on the lookout for the mendicancy squad. Oof, love that word. In the vestibule below was a letterbox into which no letter would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity when its possessor was being paid $30 per week. Now, when the income was shrunk to $20, the letters of Dillingham looked blurred, as though they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But wherever and whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended her cheeks with the powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking the gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months with this result. $20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always are. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim, her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent planning for something nice for him, something fine and rare and sterling, something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. So we'll stop there for just a moment. The layers of Gilded Age assumptions, pre-feminist, by the way, Gilded Age presumptions, are layered right there in that first part of a gift, or the gift of the Magi. But we can't understand William Sidney Porter without actually going into a little bit about who William Sidney Porter is. He was born September 11th, 1862, and died June 5th, 1910. He was an American writer known primarily for his short stories, though he also wrote poetry and he peddled a little bit in nonfiction. Born in Greensboro, North Carolina, Porter worked at his uncle's pharmacy after finishing school and became a licensed pharmacist at age 19. In March 1882, he moved to Texas, where he initially lived on a ranch and later settled in Austin, where he met his first wife, Ethel Estes. While working as a drafter in the Texas General Land Office, Porter began developing characters for his short stories. He later worked for the First National Bank of Austin while also publishing a weekly periodical, The Rolling Stone. Now, in 1895, he was charged with embezzlement stemming from an audit of the bank. Before the trial, he fled to Honduras, where he began writing Cabbages and Kings, which was a collection of short stories in which he coined the term, quote unquote, Banana Republic. Porter surrendered to U.S. authorities when he learned his wife was dying from tuberculosis. By the way, a disease that his mother died of and that he lived his entire life in fear of getting and of dying of. And he cared for his wife, his first wife, until her death in July 1897. As a result of returning and surrendering to the U.S. authorities, William Sidney Porter was sentenced to a 5-year federal prison sentence for embezzling, get this, $854.08 in March 1898 at the Ohio Federal Penitentiary, where he served there as a night druggist, because apparently writing doesn't get you very far in a federal penitentiary in 1898. While imprisoned, Porter published 14 stories under various pseudonyms, one being O. Henry. I don't think Tom knew much about this guy or knew much about O. Henry before we started our podcast today. So you've had a chance a little bit to hear about this, Tom. What do you think about this fellow, William Sidney Porter?
Interestingly enough, you're right. I didn't really know the depth, any kind of depth of his life or who he was, but I actually had heard of this particular story. I don't know why this particular story, but this one I had heard of. I've known about it. I've like read passages of it or had discussions about certain pieces of it and stuff like that before today. But the reality of it was this probably the only, I don't know how you were able to pick the only story I've ever heard of from O. Henry. But it's interesting. But when you ask like what you, it's funny too, because I thought my first thought coming out of this onto this podcast was going to be something totally different than what I thought about his life, because I read the first couple of passages of this and was thinking to myself, how do you get $1.87 with having 60 pennies? The math, I was so bugged out by the math here, not realizing that in at this time frame, I think our currency had half pennies and things like that.
Yeah.
Time too. So
Yep.
so technically you could have that. So my brain was okay after I took a step back. Anyway, so but that's where my first thought went when I read this. I was like, you got $1.87. What are you talking about? How do you have
What are you talking about?
That doesn't make any sense. The math doesn't work. Oh, Henry needs to go back to school. And then realizing that he was actually intelligent, intelligent to the point, of, I mean, a pharmacist at 19, which you definitely could not do today.
No.
But I know that, the manners and the processes in which we have to become a licensed anything, it doesn't even matter. Insert licensure here, whether it's pharmacist, nurse, plumber, electrician, it doesn't really matter. But 100 years ago, or 100 and whatever years ago, or almost 200 years ago, sorry, they didn't have the same. I mean, you literally could apprentice under somebody for a certain amount of time and then all of a sudden you're licensed. So we didn't have the formal schooling and testing and all that stuff that we have today. So I was initially like, my first reaction was, oh my God, this guy was brilliant, a pharmacist at 19, thinking of what today's pharmacists have to go through in order to become it. And then realizing after the fact, after thinking of it for a second and going, he probably didn't have to do any of that.
He didn't have to do any of that. He didn't have to do any of that.
Anyway. So
he literally poured pills in one bottle to another bottle, which is, that's all he had to do.
Right.
And maybe some tinctures and some powders, things like that. But whatever, it's fine.
I mean, it's not like he was an alchemist, right? Like he wasn't actually mixing this stuff together. It wasn't so, but anyway, some of the things, it was funny. Like you think about just the brief description of his life that you just read a second ago, and you try to think about how you can take lessons out of it for leaders. I find interesting because we've said this about 100 times on this podcast together, Hasan, right? Like the more things change, the more things stay the same, right? So the guy has a job, leaves that job to go better himself, great, gets married, awesome, gets charged with a crime, leaves the country, comes back to the country. Why? Because of a girl.
This is a
Like
girl.
it's this story has been written about 1,000 times, right? Like so and then of course he faces his punishment, does his time, comes out, and then you don't really hear a lot more about him after that. Like you don't really hear a lot more of his life after the prison sentence.
Well, so one of
Because
the
he
interesting
dies
things.
shortly after, right? Like if you think about it, he dies
Well,
1910, which is
well,
so
one of the things, and by the way, this particular volume of O. Henry's stories has a great introduction in it that goes really deep into his life. And one of the things that the writer of the introduction says is this about the jail. He says, jail was deeply traumatic for him, though he received favorable treatment as a pharmacist and was given reasonable freedom to continue writing. No one knows exactly how or why he transformed himself in those years into what became his internationally celebrated pen name, O. Henry, nor does anyone know precisely what, if anything, the pseudonym is supposed to mean. By the way, we have some information about the pseudonym later on that we'll talk about. Clearly, the important thing is that it is a pseudonym. The use of the name O. Henry was a way of separating himself from much of the reality he had no inclination to deal with.
yeah.
I mean, so we've never talked about prison on this podcast, but we might as well talk about it today. So I've watched the Netflix show. I'm a little bit of a fan of this show. Locked Up Abroad, only because the way I run my mouth, if I ever get in trouble in a foreign country, I want to know what I'm getting into.
For sure.
like like I know not to run my mouth in like Honduras. I know you just shut up. Just shut up. Shut your mouth. There's no freedom of speech there. When the man with the AK-47 tells you to shut up, you know what you do?
Shut up.
Shut up. because I can't make it in Honduran prison. There are things I would have to do in that prison where you can't come back from them.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough, Scottish prison is also terror. No, not Scottish. Norwegian prison. Norwegian prison, very clean, very very white,
Almost livable.
almost livable. But then there's a Caucasian fellow with like face tattoos all over his face who says he's going to kill you with like a penknife tomorrow. And he's very polite about it, by the way, but he's still going to kill you with a penknife. You're just like, oh, so there's like a range, continuum.
Yeah. You sir have offended me today, so tomorrow you must die.
And he's serious. Like he's in here for killing somebody. He's not joking around. In like Finland.
Yeah.
Which is like the most like I tend to think of as an American. And my Finnish listeners, I apologize to you. I'm sure you're like living out the wire there. I'm sure it's like West Baltimore everywhere in Finland all the time.
Highly unlikely.
but where I come from, like somebody tells you they're gonna kill you, like it's not usually in an antiseptic environment next to a fjord where that's gonna happen, right? But I guess you got to put a prison wherever. So I watched the show Locked Up Abroad. That way I could see these kinds of experiences. And so I think of the American penitentiary experience. And I've known people who have gone to jail. I've known at least 3 people in my life who have gone to jail. It might be as high as 5, but at least 3 people for sure that went to jail, right? A variety of different things. Not murder, just a variety of different things. And one of the things I remember one guy telling me when he got out, he said, they call it a correctional facility, but they're not correcting anything. And in 1890, it must have been closer to like the Honduras kind of like experience than what is now, which is probably a little bit closer, at least in theory, to more of the Finnish experience, right? William Sidney Porter went in to prison after trying to escape to, ironically enough, Honduras. and then came out, or not came out, but for he went for embezzlement because he like moved a couple of what do you call it, commas around incorrectly in the bank's ledgers. And weirdly enough, the bank in Texas, when you read about this, they declined to prosecute him. The bank didn't think it was a problem, but the federal government thought that what he had done was a problem.
Interesting. Interesting.
And so he was traumatized by this.
Well, I mean, that's especially, think about it. Embezzlement, it means like you're taking the money, right? So you're
Right.
taking the money and you're going to go live high on a high life on whatever money you're because embezzlement, for those of you who don't know, is stealing. You're stealing the money from some, but he didn't actually physically take the money. He made it's an accounting error, right? Like, so
It's a clerical error.
A clerical error. It's right. It's not even an accounting error. It's more a clerical error than even accounting, which is why the bank didn't care. But so why did the government, like, that's the part that I never understood, right? I didn't understand this. Like, so why did the government choose to prosecute anyway? Are they trying to make an example out of some guy who doesn't matter to anybody? like
So I will read you from the introduction because I was also fascinated by this. So here we go. The magazine did not flourish, the Rolling Stone magazine that he established in Texas. The author here says Porter slid into a life of dissolution and illicit borrowing from various bank accounts. His father-in-law repaid his embezzlement, and the jury acquitted him on criminal charges. Okay, so it wasn't a clerical error. He was actually like moving money around.
Okay.
But the federal bank examiners moved for a new trial. The Rolling Stone, his magazine, died in 1895. Porter was rearrested in 1896 and promptly fled, first to New Orleans and then to Honduras. He stayed 2 years. Roughly a year later, learning that his wife was near death, he returned. She died a few months afterward. The next year, 1898, he was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 5 years in the penitentiary in Columbus, Ohio, where he, in fact, served over 3 years. So it wasn't a clerical error. My bad. I was incorrect. I thought it was, because this is the other thing about William Sidney Porter. There's multiple stories about his life. Like if you go to the Wikipedia, the stuff on his Wikipedia article is different than what's in this introduction here.
Oh, interesting.
So he's one of these authors who he's fascinating to me because he created a pseudonym to hide from the shame of going to jail, I think. Because back then, if you, in the 1890s, if you were going to jail, that means you had failed. And by the way, going to jail in a country where you just come out of the Civil War, where you could go west to escape like the federal forces if you needed to. And we've talked about, Sitting Bull and the movement of the native tribes and all these kinds of things that were happening to people all at the same time after the Civil War, right? They were all part of, Henry was part of that massive shifting of America, right?
Well, I mean, let's call it what it is, right? It was the forming of the Wild Wild West, right? So in
right,
the Wild West was something that the government had very little control over, and
right
until much later in history. I mean, like Wounded Knee was 1890, right? So we're talking just a few years after Wounded Knee so that the West was still no man's land for the most part, especially when the government came to view it, because they had no way of wrapping their arms around the whole thing anyway. So they were kind of, in the way that local governments kind of again, it was the Wild Wild West. That's why we use that reference to things that are just going a little crazy when when you're talking about starting cryptocurrency. At one point was considered the Wild Wild West of investment, right? Like, I mean,
well,
maybe
it still is.
I don't know.
It still is.
I'm just saying, like, we use that reference for a reason. So to your point, like, so he could have very easily skipped out, gone to California, New Mexico, whatever, and never been seen again, and not had to worry about any of this stuff. They would never caught up with him.
Never. And Honduras is one thing. New Orleans is a major port. It's Louisiana. I mean, come on. But you could go to, and by the way, he had lived in Texas for the vast majority of his adult life, right? And so there's further west than Texas. Like you can go to New Mexico. I mean, you go to Arizona. All that's just unfettered.
I mean,
wildness.
Let's be realistic here, Hassan. It's 2024. If you wanted to disappear, who's chasing you to Utah? Like,
nobody.
You know what I mean? Like, we still have states that if you just went there and laid low, nobody would question you and you could just live your life and nobody would go looking for you. Like,
there's a reason that, and by the way, I'm saying this merely as a statement of fact, not a knock on anybody. But if you want to be a white supremacist, or quite frankly, a black supremacist, actually, why are we being racial here? Idaho's the best place to do that. And I'm not knocking people from Idaho. I'm really not. There are a lot of nice people in Idaho. Not Des Moines, but Boise is great. Des Moines in Iowa. Boise is great. I've been to Boise a couple times. I've been to Coeur d'Alene. I almost took a job in Coeur d'Alene. Fine. It's a beautiful country. And like, if you want to disappear, okay, so current events, right? The guy who allegedly, we have to say allegedly, shot the United Healthcare CEO, right? Yeah.
Which, by the way, my wife works for. My wife works for that company.
A full disclosure on the
podcast. Full disclosure. I knew about that shooting immediately because she got an email. And we both work from home. So she came running out. She goes, "Did you just see the news? Did you see what happened?" I went, "How would I know that happened? Nobody's reporting on it yet." I literally Googled it and nothing was being reported yet.
My CEO got shot.
She's like, "I can't believe this." Like, and I'm like, I was like, wow. Anyway, go ahead. So the CEO.
So the CEO, right. Yeah. So the Italian fellow, the alleged shooter, then you can go find his name. He probably should have not gone to a McDonald's in Pennsylvania. He probably should have gone to the Great Smoky Mountains, following in the example of, remember, I know Tom, you'll remember this, the Olympic Park bomber, not Richard Jewell, not the guy who was accused of being the Olympic Park bomber, who actually wasn't, and his life got all messed up. But Clint Eastwood made a movie about him. The guy who actually did the bombing, this is something that's little known about this guy. He disappeared for like 10 years into the Great Smoky Mountains of North Carolina. And the only reason the FBI got him was because he walked out to get like a newspaper or something, or like turkey jerky. Went to like a gas station. He just walked out of the woods. And if he never walked out of the woods, the Fibbies, the FBI would have never caught him.
Yeah.
And this is North Carolina. This isn't the West. This isn't Idaho. To your point, Porter could have gone. He could have gone and hid somewhere. Could have gone in the mountains, you know, and still done his writing. By the way, he still would have been able to write, and it probably would have, by the way, helped for his tuberculosis, which he did. That was one of the interesting things I found out about him. He lived in fear of dying of tuberculosis, and eventually he died of cirrhosis, heart failure, and tuberculosis.
He was pretty young when he died too. Was it 48?
Yeah, he was in his late 40s. Yeah, but he didn't hit until, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. But he didn't hit as an author until he was in his late 30s.
Yeah.
So he really only had like maybe 7-8 years of just like ridiculous production, and just sort of wrote himself to death in an attempt to escape from the shame of that prison sentence. Yeah, being arrested. All right. There's some lessons that leaders can glean from the life and times of William Sidney Porter. Maybe the lesson is this: escape to the West.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is like, I think there is a slight lesson here too that's a little bit more in depth, which is like, no matter how much you run from something, if the problem still persists, you're gonna have to face it at some point or another, right? Like that's essentially what he did. He left. He faced the music, but only when he had to come back to help, to help his wife. But I mean, we've all kind of been there, done that, right? It doesn't have to be something this, the word escapes me, but it doesn't have to be this bad, right? Like where you committed a crime that you're coming back to pay for the crime. Sometimes it's a decision that you just don't make right at the moment because you don't want to make it for whatever reason it is. and then you
Right.
just move on past it. If it's still sitting there taunting you, you got to come back to it at some point, or it's gonna be your demise, right? Like that's and if you've ever been in the leadership position, I think you'll understand what I'm saying right now, because
Hmm.
like that, not addressing the elephant in the room, not addressing a problem that's going to continue to be a problem, not addressing things that are gonna be the downfall of your company if you don't take care of it. At some point, you have to go back and do it. So I guess I don't know that's a little bit more to it
There's
than
an old school. Well, there's an old school word. You'll like this word because you and I are roughly in the same sort of area where we were raised with certain English terms that have now fallen out of favor. Comeuppance.
yeah, yeah, exactly,
like
exactly.
like you're gonna get your comeuppance, like you just are. Long have I feared that my comeuppance would show up, and it did.
Yeah.
It always does
I
invariably.
was told at a very young age, as I was going through the ranks and starting to become more authoritative in certain roles,
Mhm.
somebody much older than me that was I actually managed them, and they were a subordinate of mine, but they were much 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 older than me. At the time I was probably in my mid 20s, and they were like 58 or 59, the
Oh wow.
closer
Okay.
to retirement. And he said something to me that just stuck forever, and now I'm understanding it even more, even though being at his age level, and I loved this guy, by the way. Even though he was a subordinate, I viewed him more like a mentor, even though I was
Mhm.
supposed to be his boss.
Yeah.
And but because of that age gap and his experience and it, it I anyway, he said to me, be nice to people on the way up because you're going to meet them again on the way down. And I always did it because he told me to do that, and it stuck with me that it's a good thing to do, like treat people with respect, and like it doesn't matter how powerful you get or how much authority you get, like whatever. And now that I'm in the back end of my career, I'm thinking of that going, I'm glad I did that. Like, because there's a lot of people that used to work for me that were much younger, and now they're on the way up, and now I can reach out to them for
Uh-huh.
help. I get like they don't think twice about giving me the time of day to be helpful to like. I was like, and so now I'm thinking of that advice, saying, I'm glad I took that advice. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yep.
Uh, anyway,
Yep. Absolutely. All right. Back to the short story. Back to the gift of the Magi. By the way, this is an open source short story, so you can get this anywhere you want on the internet and check this out just in time for the holidays. All right. Back to the story. There was a pure glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen pure glass in an $8 flat. A very thin, very agile person may, by observing his reflection in rapid sequence of longitudinal stripes, obtain a fairly accurate conception of his looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. Suddenly, she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now, there were two possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs in which they both took mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch, which had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the air shaft, Della would have let her hair hang out the window some day to dry, just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor, with all his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed, just to see him pluck at his beard from envy. So now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her. And then she did it up again nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood still while a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. On went her old brown jacket. On went her old brown hat. With a whirl of skirts and with the brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Mademoiselle Sofronie, hair goods of all kinds. One flight up, Della ran and collected herself, panting. Madame, large, too white, chilly, hardly looked the Sofronie. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Madame. Take your hat off and let's have a sight at the looks of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. Give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hashed metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. One of the things that jumps out to you about William Sidney Porter's writing, and it doesn't matter whether it's Cabbages and Kings, whether it's Gift of the Magi, or any of the stories that take place in New York City. One of the things that jumps out to you about O. Henry's stories is that while he is a writer of the Gilded Age, when everyone is getting rich off of oil, off of the back end of the Industrial Revolution, when literally people are selling everything they possibly can, even, interestingly enough, General Grant in his administration, at least his first one and potentially into his second one, selling even the White House, literally anything that was nailed down between, or that wasn't nailed down between 1870 and like 1910 was literally being sold in America, which is, by the way, part of the reason why Woodrow Wilson proposed the creation of the amendment that, or proposed the amendment that created the IRS in 1913, and why Woodrow Wilson proposed that as his pitch for the amendment that would create the IRS, I believe that is the 16th Amendment. He also said that amendment would never be used for any more than millionaires, because everybody in America was trying to become one. One of the things that you see in the Gilded Age, one of the things that you see during this time of immense avarice and greed that is driving the country, one of the things that you see is immense poverty on the other side of that. And O. Henry's stories focused on poverty. We see, at least in New York City stories, we see that reflected in O. Henry's life on the embezzlement charge that he had. O. Henry spent a lot of his life pursuing money and trying to attain financial security for himself and for his family. But there was also a sense of trauma underneath this that O. Henry was able to tap into. There's this idea from Kevin Hart that you got to laugh at my pain, right? you got to find entertainment in my trauma. And just like there's a thin line between love and hate, there's also a thin line between the tragedy of trauma, particularly the trauma related to want, and the humor inherent in it. Most of our stories today, and I just recorded a shorts episode that you should listen to before this one about why men don't read literary novels. But increasingly men don't read literary novels. One of the challenges of our time is that our trauma, just like in the Gilded Age, is everywhere, all over the place, all the time. We can see our trauma on TikTok. We could see our trauma on Instagram. We could see everybody else's trauma too. And the trauma that would have been tragedy in the past is no longer fodder for story, particularly not at a mass entertainment level, which is why most of the stories that we see in our mass entertainment, and I'm talking about movies or even streaming television shows, most of the entertainment these days, at least in my opinion, doesn't even rise to the level of a William Sidney Porter short story. Most of the things that we see are flat, boring, derivative, are remarkably unsurprising and uninspiring. And by the way, I think that's a shame. I think it's a shame because the uniqueness of trauma is now no longer being used as fodder for story the way O. Henry did. I think this is a real challenge, but I also think it's a challenge for leadership. And so this is going to put us in mind of a particular colleague of ours. This is when I wrote this, I was like, oh, he's going to think about this person when I bring this up, but a particular shared colleague of ours. But let's talk a little bit about storytelling, Tom. Now, well, I mean, it's interesting. So I went back and listened to a bunch of our episodes that we've done together. We haven't actually ever directly addressed storytelling. We've gone around it and inside it and underneath it and through it, but directly talking about the actual act of storytelling itself, like how do you structure a narrative? What is the thing that feeds that narrative underneath? Is it trauma? Is it tragedy? Is it humor? Is it triumph? Is it drama? We've talked a lot about the things around it, but the actual like act of putting together a story we've never talked about, like the nuts and bolts of that. So how can leaders leverage, let's start with this question, how can leaders leverage personal trauma the way O. Henry did to put together a compelling story?
Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, the Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us. That's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the Foundation for Intentional Leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show.
Well, that's an awful lot to unpack there. Hey,
It is. It is.
I think before you even get into that question, you need to understand some dynamics first, right? Meaning, I think one of the I was probably, I don't know, I was 18 or 19 years old. I was driving and I saw this billboard that said, and it read this quote that nobody was ever able to prove who exactly it came from, but everyone believes it came from Albert Einstein, which
Mm-hmm.
was perception is greater than reality. One of the
Yeah.
reasons I think that one of the reasons that I think that you're feeling the way you are about narratives and storytelling and the lack thereof compared to the 1800s and the Gilded Age or whatever. I think that we forget, and sometimes we forget that two people can view the exact same situation and walk away with it two completely different perceptions of how that situation impacts their life, right?
Yep.
And and so somebody who decides to look at a tragedy and turn it into entertainment because my pain can be laughter and what I suffered through could, if I present my suffering in the right way, I could potentially prevent somebody else from suffering from the same thing because they then will take the lighter side of that scenario, right? Somebody's a death, a car accident, cancer, drug addiction, whatever the trauma is that you've experienced. There are people that can take those traumas and turn them into great stories, and there are people that internalize those traumas until it turns out to be something disastrous. And in that case, I think of somebody, for the sake of argument, somebody like Robin Williams, right?
Sure. Okay.
He externalized so much of his internal pain, but because it was internal and nobody ever saw it, it was the end of it. He took his own life because of it, right? So it was like,
Right.
so I think when you start understanding the dynamics of people and you start understanding how those things, how you perceive those things are going to impact your narrative or how your storytelling is, right? So all that being said, if you're talking strictly about the structure, then sure, you need an intro and you need a this and you need sure. I mean, all that stuff is pretty simple, and the audience can go look it up. There's nothing brilliant about the structure of how a story should be presented. But when you start talking about the underlying tones and the narratives and the context and all that stuff and how you want it to be received, I think you have to go start backwards. I think you have to start with your audience. Start with the audience. What are you trying to convey to them? What emotional state are you trying to get them to feel when they read whatever it is you're writing? Your storytelling is going to be, again, so storytelling seems to always come from a place of a couple of things. Trauma is absolutely one of them. Adventure is another. Like you've just had this wild adventure that you deemed a success because of X, whatever the hell that happens. So now you want to write a story about it. Or like, so there's a handful of things like that, whether it's trauma or adventure or success or overcoming adversity, like some sort of adversity. Any of those things can be the foundation of the story, but none of them matter unless you know who you're telling the story to. So
Right. Yeah.
and again, we can bounce in and out of literature versus marketing. Sometimes they're the same, but literature versus marketing versus just, I mean, in our culture, storytelling was a verbal thing. You didn't write any of these things down. It was just, how could you tell the
Right.
story and the mannerisms and the verbalization and how you accentuate certain words mattered. And like there's even from a verbal storytelling perspective, there's ways to tell the story that you want to make an impact at certain points so that you get a particular message conveyed, right? So, but again, that still goes back to knowing your audience. You need to know
Right.
telling the story to a bunch of 5-year-olds is very different than you could probably tell the same exact story to a bunch of 5-year-olds and a bunch of 50-year-olds, and it would sound like two different stories. It'll sound like two completely different things, but it's the same. It's based on the same action or activity or trauma, right?
Right.
So it's, again, I think personal trauma. First of all, none of us are going to escape it. Let's just get that right out of the question. Like, get that right out of the gate.
Yeah.
No matter
Yeah.
how well off you think you are, no matter how great a childhood you had, no matter how, none of us will escape personal trauma. You are going to face some sort of personal adversity in your life, regardless of who you are and where you are in the economic, socioeconomic scale. It doesn't matter. Money doesn't protect you. Neither does title or any other factor that you can think of that you think of somebody else's life is better than yours or yours is better than somebody else's. Personal trauma is going to happen in one way, shape, or form. So taking that into consideration and how you leverage that as as a leader, I think, again, knowing your audience, knowing your subordinates, knowing the people that you are leading, knowing your followers is going to be really drastically important when you come to how you're going to leverage that trauma to motivate them, move them to do whatever that is. But I definitely think it's possible. I think you just need to know yourself and know your audience really well.
Well, there are only 5 stories. Like, we've known this since Shakespeare. I say this all the time. Well, not all the time. This is the first time I'm saying this on the podcast in this sort of form. But I say it. I used to say it a lot in trainings, right? When I would do training on or deliver training content on leadership development and storytelling and leadership and narrative or conflict and narrative, right? There's only 5 stories, right? So to your point, there's a quest story, which is always an adventure story, right? I went off and did something. I discovered something. I discovered fire and brought it back to people. Okay, so there's a quest story. That went out and picked up that branch that was hit by lightning. Kind of awesome. We're gonna be able to cook our food now. Then you have after a quest story, you have a romance. Now it's interesting. We almost never tell romantic stories at work, obviously, because we all want to avoid sexual harassment. But romantic stories at work or in a leadership context are always the kinds of stories that begin with, I like this, or I like that, or I had a passion about this, or I had a passion about that. Anytime as a leader or a follower, you're using the word passion to describe something that's happening, you're talking about a love story. Then you have your third kind of story is your you're kind of you're to the point that we're talking about your tragedy, right? Now tragedy could be an adventure too, right? But tragedy is usually or we sometimes call this a conflict story, but tragedy is I hate this person or this person hates me, particularly at work, or I was right about this project and now these people are going to get their, to use the word we used in the last segment, these people are going to get their comeuppance and I'm going to laugh, Schadenfreude, Then the next kind of story you have is it's sort of a combination of the quest story, the conflict story, and the romantic story, right? But it's more of a persuasive story. It's to your point about motivation. It's the kind of story that you tell with all of those elements that's trying to push people to do something. And then the fifth kind of story, which we tell the least often, but we only ever tell it when we ourselves are new to a role, is the stranger in a strange land story. I don't know what's happening here. I'm a stranger. This is all weird. And why am I here? Like, I'm glad you brought fire, but like I was in the cave 2 caves over. I never even heard of you, right? Why am I here?
I don't know why we always turn into cavemen when we do this. Hey, son, we always turn into
I
was 3 caves down. I heard somebody had fire. I came to see what it was. What's this fire thing?
It seemed like a good idea to show up at the time.
Well, and it's funny. These are story styles, right? And I think
right.
of so what are the things that motivate people? And you can make there's so many books about like motivational factors and what motivations are. They all get boiled down to 2 things. It's self-preservation or the preservation of others. Like
right.
that's it. No matter what else you can say. Well, no. People are motivated by money. No. But what does money give you? Money, when you get a lot of money, you have self-preservation. Like
right.
And you have the ability to help your family and friends, which is the preservation of others, right? Like it just what motivates us as human beings are basically those 2 things. So all of those stories, usually if you read them and you read enough of them, you'll start seeing underlying tones of where the self-preservation comes in or the preservation of others.
Right.
So again, when you're talking about storytelling and what the components of it are, how you start to master it, you have to determine, to your point a few seconds ago, what style is the story going to be?
Yeah.
What is going to be do you know your audience well enough that you know to face them with one of those styles and in one of those motivating factors, either self-preservation or the preservation of others? So those are the components. Like I said earlier, I was joking a little bit, like the structure of it, like, you have to have an intro, you have to have this, you have to have an outro. Like, oh yeah. Like anybody can look that up. That's the easy part. Right?
Cortex triangle.
Exactly. Yeah. But the true mastery of that Venn diagram, right? Which is like the style overlapping the motivation, overlapping the delivery piece of it, and perfecting all 3 of those things, that centerpiece of the Venn diagram. I think everybody has the capability of hitting it. I think everybody has the capability of hitting the mark. It's just a matter of where we are, like what our goals are trying to hit with it. Think about a 5-year-old trying to convince you to take him to the store to get candy. If he tries and fails at that often enough, he's eventually going to master that. He's going to get it. They're going to get it. I'm telling you, they'll figure it out eventually.
Well, one of the things I always tell folks is the best person in the history of the world at sales is a 5 to 7-year-old.
Absolutely. I agree.
Best person in the history of the world at sales, because all they have to do, this is all a 5 to 7-year-old, all things being equal, of course, in a robust situation where they are free to pursue themselves. Okay, cool. Not talking about traumatic situations or situations of like criminal danger or anything like that. Okay. Yeah. Middle class, right? 5 to 7-year-old middle class kid in America is the best salesman in the world, because all they have to do, is watch you all day. They got nothing else going on. They literally have nothing else going on. They go to watch their target all day because they know you have something and they know that you're the thing in the way to get it. And all they have to do is just watch you. That's it. Just all day, just observe.
And they learn and they know their audience.
That's it. That's right.
They know their audience. They know their audience, and they know that they don't have to come up with complicated concepts or ideas or complicated questions to get the
No,
answers that they want.
no.
Dad, can we go to the store to buy me candy? No, not right now. But why? I'm a little busy right now. I don't have the time. But why are you busy? Well, because I have to do this. Like they ask the simplest questions until they just beat you down. And you don't
Their
have a good enough reason to say no anymore.
their discovery process is ruthless.
Exactly.
Well, the other piece is they have, and this is the thing that like adults in sales or adults who are telling stories forget. That 5 to 7 year old has literally nothing to lose.
Right.
They've already done the cost benefit analysis ratio. Like if I can get this person to say yes, I'm going to get candy or watch TV or play video games or whatever the heck it is that I want. And if they say no, well, I'm just stuck in the same situation I was in right now, which is I have no candy, I have no video games,
Right.
and I have no TV. So, like, how is this? What's the downside to me? Right?
It doesn't set them backwards.
It does not. No, and they have a good understanding of time because for them, on a long, I mean, time is infinite. It's never. I mean, there's no hurry.
Right.
Time's infinite.
They have all the time in the world.
Yeah, they're gonna live forever. What? You're the one that's got a problem. um yeah, I mean, I always used to say with my kids, like particularly my two youngest, like actually my three youngest, my oldest child is a little bit different, but my three youngest, I always used to say that is the most, I mean, like if I could have bottled that, my God, like I would I could have sold anything. I could have sold anything. I could have sold water to a well.
Yeah, and most of that is to your point, most of that is just the lack of fear of failure. Right?
Oh yeah, none.
They don't have the fear of failure, so they just go. They just go and they do and they go and they ask and they think. They don't overthink anything.
Nope.
They don't there's no, there's no hesitation. There's no, like, that's their biggest strength is
Right.
the lack of fear of failure. They just don't have it.
Well, why would they feel failure? Nothing bad has ever happened to them.
And that's my point. That's why they
Like,
make
they're
us
never.
salespeople, because the salespeople that you hire, that you say, by the way, if you don't hit your quota, you're fired. They have a fear of failure right out the gate. You got a fear of failure.
Uh, yeah. Okay. So you need, by the way, the story about money is a sick story. It's either a rags to riches story or a riches to rags story.
Yeah, right.
Those are your two stories. Those are your two stories, or two variations of that story there. Okay, back to the book. Back to the short story here, The Gift of the Magi. I'm going to pick it up here. We're going to kind of move quickly through this because we want to get to the denouement here, and we have a window here that's rapidly closing, but it's okay. So Della's ransacking the store for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores, and she had turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone and not by meretricious ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew it must be Jim's. It was like him, quietness and value. The description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it as she hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on its watch, Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly on account of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way to a little prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lighted the gas and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love, which is always a tremendous task, dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror long, carefully, and critically. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della doubled the fob chain in her hand and sat in a corner of the table near the door that he always entered. Then she heard his step on the stair, away down on the first flight, and she turned white just for a moment. She had a habit of saying little silent prayers about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, "Please, God, make him think I am still pretty." The door opened, and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor fellow. He was only 22, and to be burdened with a family, he needed a new overcoat, and he was without gloves. Jim stopped inside the door, as immovable as a setter at the scent of a quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly with that peculiar expression on his face. Now I'm going to skip one thing here and go down to this part. "You've cut off your hair?" asked Jim laboriously, as if she had not arrived at that patent fact yet, even after the hardest mental labor. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me, Jim? Just as well, anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?" Jim looked around the room curiously. "You say your hair is gone," he said, with an air of almost of idiocy. "You needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold. I tell you, sold and gone. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered," she went on with a sudden serious sweetness, "but nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim?" Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He enfolded his Della. "For 10 seconds, let us regard with discreet scrutiny some inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week or $1,000,000 a year. What is the difference? A mathematician or a wit would give you the wrong answer. The Magi brought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. This dark assertion will be illuminated later on." Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it upon the table. "Don't make any mistake, Dell," he said, "about me. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that could make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going a while at first." White fingers and nimble tore at the string and paper, and then an ecstatic scream of joy, and then, alas, a quick feminine change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate employment of all the comforting powers of the lord of the flat. For there lay the combs, the set of combs, side and back, that Della had worshipped for long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoiseshell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers, but the tresses that should have adorned the coveted adornments were gone. But she hugged them to her bosom, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and smile and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Della leaped up like a little singed cat and cried, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly upon her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with the reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to show you what it looks like on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down the couch and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," he said, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep them a while. It's too nice to use just a present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. And now, suppose you put the chops on." So our point earlier, by the way, O. Henry was once asked by a humorist named Irvin Cobb, an unreconstructed Southern humorist, in in the 1910s in a restaurant just before he died, where he got his stories from. And O. Henry infamously said this. He said, "Oh, everything. There are stories in everything." And then he proceeded to pick up a menu, according to the story as it goes, and he created a story out of the menu in the diner he was having breakfast at with Irwin. Connection is what we chase in the internet era, and connection is what we chased and have chased in previous eras in this country. Connection is nothing new, but it used to be person-to-person connection through stories. O. Henry's stories have never been out of print. I mentioned this already, since his death in 1910. He only attained fame, by the way, and he'd been writing short stories since he was 19. but he only attained fame for writing short stories at the age of 39. And literally, he worked himself to death, worked and drank. However, the year before his death in 1909, he gave an interview to the New York Times in which he talked about the pen name O. Henry. And this is directly from his words. He says, "It was during these New Orleans days that I adopted my pen name of O. Henry. I said to a friend, quote, I'm going to send out some stuff. I don't know if it amounts to much, so I want to get a literary alias. Help me pick out a good one." He suggested that we get a newspaper and pick a name from the first list of notables that we found in it. In the society columns, we found the account of a fashionable ball. "Here we have our notables," said he. We looked down the list, and my eye lighted on the name Henry. "That'll do for a last name," said I. "And now for a first name. I want something short. None of your 3-syllable names for me." "Why don't you use a plain initial then? Letter then?" asked my friend. "Good," said I. "O is about the easiest letter written, and O it is." A newspaper once wrote and asked me what the O stands for. I replied, quote, "O stands for Oliver, the French for Oliver." And several of my stories accordingly appeared in that paper under the name Oliver Henry. This story, The Gift of the Magi, has, as Tom mentioned all the way at the beginning of our episode, is one of his more memorable stories. It has been turned into stage plays. It has been turned into movies. It has been a part of other stories. And again, has never been out of print since his death in 1910. Matter of fact, it's become so much a trope. The woman who cuts off her hair to buy combs, or sorry, to buy a watch fob or watch chain, and the man who sells his watch to buy combs, and oh, they don't talk to each other, and oh, hilarity ensues. This has become a trope of comedy. It's become a trope of tragedy, and it's become a trope of drama because O. Henry, William Sidney Porter, realized initially that there was a story inside of this trope. There was a story that was worth telling that needed to be laid out. O. Henry was also a social part of the movement of the Gilded Age. I wouldn't say he was a social justice crusader. He wasn't. He was he would probably have classified himself as a fairly progressive individual, not the way we think of progressive now, but progressive in terms of social reform, right? And many of his stories, as they reflected the poverty of the time, they also reflected the growing consumerism of the time, which we can see in The Gift of the Magi, and which is particularly ironic for it being a story that is focused around the Christmas season. As a matter of fact, when I was reading this, and Tom and I talked about A Christmas Carol, it is the anti-Christmas Carol story. It's an anti-Dickens story, even though I would say O. Henry probably got as close in an American context to capturing the the Dickensian aspect of being an American in the Gilded Age. Short story, short episode today. Can't really do a lot with this. Tom, final thoughts on O. Henry, on The Gift of the Magi, what leaders can learn from all this before we close out.
I think the biggest lesson to me here is I'm gonna feel like a broken record here, but like as a leader, knowing your audience is important, right? And in this case, knowing being able to them by talking to them, talking through problems with them, getting understanding from them, things that you like, things that if this couple had done in the first place, they wouldn't have had this major, swap off, as you would speak. Now, by the way,
Right.
I'm still thinking the person that got out, really made out in this deal is Della, because she's right. Her hair will grow back and she will use the combs. He sold the watch. That chain is useless to him from now forever. So, I mean, I think again, if you look at if you're going to make a decision based on your gut or based on lack of information, make sure it's a decision you can come back from, like she
Right.
did. She cut her hair, which by the way, I also thought selling it for $20 was where did that number come from? Because I think it's the same today. I think if a woman sold her a length of it, they're not going to get more than $20 for it either. So I just thought that was interesting on a side note. But anyway, but
The prices of hair are immune to inflationary pressures.
yeah, but her decision-making process, in my opinion, was better than his because she was only impacting, first of all, something that was going to impact only her
Yep.
and only impacting something that she knew was going to be a short-term disadvantage or some sort of short-term um, impact
Impact. Yeah.
that it was going to eventually her hair's going to grow back. He
Right.
went and made a decision based on no factor, no data, no information, no. He went on his gut and had nothing to show for it in the end.
Right.
So again, what leaders are taking out of this, God only knows. I'm literally, pulling at straws here. But but I do
Well,
think of it in that perspective. Again, two leaders, same situation. I have to make a decision based on my gut. I have to make a decision based on my gut. Can I make a decision that has a short-term impact enough that we can come back from it without anything else happening? Am I going to make a short-term impact that I can't pull back and I can't come back from? And I'm just going to run with it and live or die. I'm going to live and die by my own. I'm going to follow my own sword. I'm going to live and die by it. And if I fail, company fails, we go and we move on. It is what it is. It ends. But you know what I'm saying? Like I'm
yeah.
explaining
No,
it well enough, but I think that this does tell us a little something about how you think through a process matters.
I think that is reflected in Jim's reaction at the end there, where he's just like, oh, right, lay back on the couch,
Hands behind his head.
yeah, behind his head.
I'm gonna live with my decision.
Well, and sometimes as a leader, like I think about this often, right? So hindsight is always 2020, always, always. And one of the failures we have in our current era over the last 25 years, because of the internet, right? Because nothing ever dies and is allowed to sort of fall into a space of forgetting. We're constantly second guessing leaders' decisions of the past based off current information that we had that leaders didn't have access to. The biggest example of this is George Bush and 9/11 and making the decision to go to war in Iraq and weapons of mass destruction and blah 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 blah, right? And we judge him harshly, and we judge people who are in his administration harshly, right, wrong, or indifferently. We judge them harshly because we have information that we claim they should have had access to, but we have absolutely no certainty that they did. We can speculate. We can say they should have known. We can say they absolutely did know. My favorite conspiracy theorists always say, of course they knew. There's no way they could possibly have not known. But that's all speculation on our part based off of after action reports and after the fact information. It's just like with COVID. I don't fault anybody who made decisions between, like, quite frankly, February of 2020 and June of 2020, because you're making decisions in real time in that little gap of 90 to 100 days. You're making decisions in real time and you have no clue what is happening. Now, after that, it gets into a little bit of a different gray area there. But for that one spot, I mean, now, did they not release all the information that they've had to the public? For sure. And even whether it's 9/11 or COVID, even the quote unquote hidden information that the public should have known, whatever that may mean, is still, I hate to say this, you may want to pay attention to this, mark this, it's still limited information.
Yeah.
It's still limited. And so, again, lay back on the couch.
Subject to interpretation, too.
And subject to interpretation.
That's so, like, right. If it's not, just having information doesn't make it factual.
Right.
Like, having information, you still need to digest it or dissect it or verify it, validate it, all kinds of, like, you can't just say, I have a phone in my hand. You guys can't see this because it's blurry. I have a phone in my hand, and you can, for all you, it could be a brick. You don't know.
You don't know anything.
I don't know. Again, to your point, I think it's easy to vilify people after the fact. It's easy.
Oh, yeah.
And it's something that we've done throughout history, by the way. This has nothing to do with the internet era. We've done it throughout history, that we've vilified people after the fact, because we just, to your point, I think everything you said was absolutely dead on. It's easier to be critical when you have more information than the person that made the decision in the first place.
That's
It's
right.
very easy to be critical. What's not easy to do is take it from their perspective, now knowing what you know, doing the same, like you're going to make the same decisions. Like, that's the other thing. If you can honestly look back at somebody and say, now that I know what I know, if in the moment I probably still would have done the same thing that you do, then you can't vilify them. But we continue to do that. We continue to vilify people for making decisions based on information they currently have and not information that we have. It's bizarre. It's a bizarre kind of natural thing that we do.
Well, it's a fundamental lack of humility, I think, and I think it's a species of hubris and narcissism.
Yeah,
that we
because we're all perfect when we have the right information.
Oh yeah, everybody. Well, and this is what we're going to do. I have a strong suspicion that we are going to outsource our decision making to our coming AI systems, because we are looking for the perfect decision that will always work out everywhere across all time and will have no downsides at all. Particularly in the West, we're looking for this. In America in particular. Other places, your level of looking for perfection will vary based on your particular cultural things. But we are desperately searching for that perfect decision with no downsides. And tragically, to your point earlier, in the segment we were talking about stories, we live in a fallen world. It will never happen. There will always be a downside. And our machine learning tools, which they are only tools, just like that fire in the cave I mentioned previously, our machine learning tools will only ever be as good as the human inputs who are putting the information in. And I think that's a good spot to end for today. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and Happy Holidays from us here at the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. And with that, well, we're out.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.